So in a recent video, we had a talk about how I thought that Kaido and by extension Yamato were actually the true descendants of the original OARS and got all of his might. Now, with all that being said, I had a bit of a sit down and a think about this, and there's a massive oversight that I didn't really see when I first recorded that video, because this might actually be the case with Kaido. Like, Kaido might actually be the descendant of OARS. Not the OARS that we meet on Thriller Bark, because I don't think that's the OARS of legend. I mean the OARS that Moria and coincidentally Robin talk about during the events of Thriller Bark. Because Kaido is a continent puller, technically, because using the powers of the fish fruit mythical model Azure Dragon and the flame clouds that it produces, he is able to lift and move Onigashima. Onigashima is a gigantic island, so big that you can perhaps consider it a continent of sorts, or at least it's a landmass that could be considered as big as a continent, perhaps. With that being said, what's also quite funny about this is that in the description of OARS by Moria, he says that OARS is a great villain who made a country of villains, which is something that describes Kaido. It's also something that describes Xebec, kind of, because both in the terms of Hachinosu and Onigashima, we do have a central figure whom is the boss of an island with a big skull-like structure at its center that does make the entire land a nation of villains. So in that way, that description both fits Xebec and it fits Kaido. And probably Onigashima was made to be how it is because of Xebec's influence on Kaido. But what's so interesting about Onigashima and Hachinosu, they both have history beyond their most famous occupant making it what it is today, because we know that Onigashima wasn't always called that, and we have a history of Hachinosu being a island in which just criminals are kept. But then Xebec turned it into a proper island that functions like a full community. So I find it very interesting that that's the case with both of these islands with big skull-like structures at their center. But to continue, yes, with the fact that Onigashima is a nation of villains, more or less, and due to the fact that Kaido was able to pull the island technically, I would say he matches up more with the OARS legend that I ever thought would be possible. And it makes a lot of sense that Moria tells us this, and this starts to become a weird relation back to Kaido, because of course Moria at that point in the story has had the most intimate relationship with Kaido, because Kaido is the reason why he is the way he is, and presumably he was building up his entire zombie army to go back to fight Kaido in Wano to take Ringo back from Kaido, presumably, because as we find out in SBS 114, Moria is originally from Ringo. Well, not originally, but he was raised in Ringo. So that's very interesting. And now, in talking about this possibility, this is why I think that it's very possible, based on the information that we find out due to Yamato's good and bad timeline sketches, that it's very likely that Yamato will indeed join the crew and Oda's not pulling our leg, because if Kaido is a descendant of the original OARS and Yamato, being his daughter, inherits OARS' strength, which seems to be what's going on here, it would make sense that that's just another wrinkle of intrigue to make her more important to the narrative. Because I could see in the future her and Loki developing a bond, because over the course of One Piece, oddly, ancient giants really dig Onis and ogres. I don't know if they see them as little miniature versions of themselves, which is why they're so enamored with them or whatnot. But the opposite might be true, because we do have a lot of examples now of presumed Onis or ogres ogres having very interesting relationships with ancient giants, because Moria might be an ogre slash Oni, and he really digs members of the OARS clan, as the events of Thriller Bark tell us, and how he wanted OARS Jr.'s corpse. But then when you go over to Kaido, he had a whole subsect in his army specifically for ancient giants called the Numbers. And then his daughter Yamato struck up a friendship with Fuga, the only member of the Numbers to have eaten a smile fruit. So I find that very interesting as well, that both are technically true in one way or another. But to continue, but I do think if they do join the crew together, there's going to be a partnership that builds between the two. And I think based on Loki being a weird ancient giant himself, we're going to start to get a very interesting breakdown with Yamato being a descendant of OARS that puts her on the table for intrigue and just makes her more than just some regular Oni that we've seen throughout the series. But yeah, I do think we're going to get a little bit of a lore drop explaining that Yamato is a descendant of the original OARS, presumably the one whom is called OARS the First, which possibly means, like I said in that other video, that the zombie that we see on Thriller Bark is OARS the Second, and of course the OARS that we see in Marineford is OARS the Third, based on his Jolly Roger. So with all that being said, if you are enjoying the video so far, click the like button, and if you want to see more from me, hit the subscribe button followed by that bell so you never miss a Polyp Works video. In addition, if you could, hit the hype button because it really does help. With that being said, give me your thoughts and tell your friends about Polyp Works.